Some tools are simply not the appropriate ones for the job. Take pillows, for instance. I will confidently say that goose down is quite a good tool for the job. I've even slept on quite a few rolled up coats and sweaters in my life. And as far as improvisations go, not so bad. Stones? Not an appropriate tool for the job. I guess Torah in this week's Parashat just tells another silly story that we can ignore, right? Shabbat Shalom. Welcome, Bruchim Aba'im. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. You have found Beit Virtuali, and let's stir up a little Torah together. Before we get to answering the question posed about stones, silliness in this week's Parsha, we should first acknowledge that the most enduring image and vision in Parashat Veyetzei is the dream of the Sulam, the ladder, reaching from the place of Jacob's repose into the heavens. The interpretive potential of the angels, the messengers, ascending and descending the ladder, in addition to the ladder itself, has already been interpreted over and over again for thousands of years, much more beautifully than I could possibly hope to do it. Bookending the image of the ladder, however, is just as rich of a symbol that gets lost. And yes, it has to do with stones. There's going to be a lot to unpack here, but let's start with the verses before and then after the dream. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. He came upon a certain place and stopped there for the night, for the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. Jacob uses a rock as a pillow, when he certainly could have used a rolled-up cloak or a hastily packed bag from home with the bread removed. Heck, when caught on a hard surface without a pillow and a desperate need for a nap, hands actually work pretty well. But a rock as a pillow? Seriously? Did we even notice or pay attention to this nonsensical detail? This verse presents for us what I like to call biblical special dispensation. Slightly less dramatically. When folks in the Tanakh do stuff that makes no sense, we tend to ignore it and move on because, well, it's done by folks in the Tanakh. If our neighbor bragged that, as a matter of course, they cradled their heads at night in stone, we'd rightfully call foul. But if it's an old text, well, we can just ignore it. Biblical special dispensation. In Judaism, at the very least, this is neither fair nor really warranted. Heroes in the Jewish narrative, and yes, I'm being very dramatic with my scare quotes around the word heroes, are presented as fully as is possible within the distinct narrative style of the Torah and the limitations or advantages of the Hebrew language. Yet the characters are not superheroes, regardless of what some religious school materials have presented in a deeply misguided way to mitigate dwindling attendance with the box office draw of a, say, Doctor Strange. The myths of origins in Judaism are moments depicting the dawning of consciousness, rather than a radioactive spider or a surgeon in need of healed hands. Think burning bush, or for today's discussion, better think a dream of a ladder with angels going up and down from heaven. The spider or the exotic magic, they play great when you're making a storyboard or drawing a comic book or on the big screen, but the resulting heroes are other than us. If I get bit by a radioactive spider, I imagine I am going to be spending quite a bit of time in the very non-romantic brutality of an emergency room. I will never, however, receive superpowers other than an even greater aversion to spiders than I actually have now. Rabbi Paul, the super spider coward. The Tanakh works consistently hard to show us the universality, the humanity of its protagonists. And our attempt to push them into the realms of fantasy removes us from the purpose of Torah to present those interpretive moments that help us achieve greater consciousness, to overcome the worst of our traumas, to overcome the worst of our personal characteristics. We, as well, need a dawning of consciousness. And if we sit here thinking right now, well, I don't need a dawning of consciousness, we are exactly the people who most desperately need a dawning of consciousness. What we don't necessarily need is a radioactive spider bite. Jacob is not Super Jacob, the Hebrew hero. He is a scared, barely adult who just screwed over his much more physically imposing older brother and is now forced to leave everything that he knows and everything that he cares about. The use of a stone means something, and it's not that he has a special exmutation, or that our biblical ancestors possessed different kinds of skulls and necks than us mere mortals. And lest we fall into the fallacy of biblical special dispensation, after Jacob wakes up from the dream, the Torah is going to ask us to stop ignoring the boulder in the room and pay attention to Jacob's odd choice of pillow. We read a little bit later in chapter 28, verse 18, "Early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it." There is a lot to unpack here, but hopefully at the very least we are now looking directly at the stone instead of turning away with a shrug. Some of the details I will glance over to get to the center, but I assure you each individual detail of the story could get us to a place of dawning consciousness. First of all, where is Jacob going exactly? The text says Haran, which hopefully has already sounded a few bells, as Haran has ancestral implications to Jacob as the many years stopover of Abraham, as Jacob's grandfather was following that Lech Lecha directive from earlier in the Torah. Haran is another name for Padam Aran, and we know from the end of the last parasha that Jacob has been sent there, directly spoken by Isaac, in order to avoid the sin of taking a Canaanite wife, and unspoken so that he can escape from his really mad brother and all the danger that Esau represents. All this is fine until you add some perspective on where exactly Haran is. The modern state of Israel is just under 470 kilometers from the tip in the south to the very north, from Eilat to Tel Dan. Haran is identified as the modern Turkish village of Urfa. From Jacob's starting point in Beersheba, that's about 1,000-kilometer journey. That's roughly Seattle, Washington to Helena, Montana. For those of you in the UK, that's the walk from Inverness to Brighton. For those of us in Central Europe, that's Paris to Berlin. Haran is an ancestral stopover 2 generations removed for Jacob. Forgetting for a moment that Jacob is alone, something that we really shouldn't forget for how big of a deal that was 4,000 years ago, where we really cannot stress how terrified Jacob probably was. Jacob has to undertake a journey that is comprehensible to us today only because of trains, planes, automobiles, autobahns, motorways, interstates. And add to that the unknown factor. What kind of support structure did we have the first time that we left our proverbial tents? Or looking at it differently, many of us are several generations, for example, removed from a European ancestor. Which of us are going to move today, sight unseen, to an ancestral village in Poland with distant relatives never met? Just from the nature of this journey and all of the unknowns, what would our state of mind be? What would Jacob's state of mind be? All right, so now we get to the stone itself. If we can all just agree that, unless we're training for some special kind of yoga Olympics, rocks make illogical pillows, then we can start asking the question of why, regardless, Jacob made this choice. Here's where it gets darker, but oh, so interesting. If you travel to Jerusalem and try to locate the Menachem Begin Center or the St. Andrew's Church on the edge of the Valley of Hinnom, you are nearby one of the most fascinating visible remnants of First Temple Judaism. Unlike the Second Temple, where we desiccated bones after death and put them in ossuaries, First Temple tombs were a bit more tactile, with details that ultimately explain more about where we came from than we might even be ready or willing to hear. These Iron Age tombs consisted of 2 chambers, an upper and a lower, connected by a hole through which perhaps a small child could crawl. Bodies after death, perhaps not so differently than by a Chevra Kadisha or a Jewish burial society today, would have been cleaned and then shrouded, after which they would be placed in the upper chamber. Now, since we're talking desert, that means that after a certain amount of time, the bodies would be desiccated, completely dried out, and then what I can imagine being also done with ceremony, the bones would then be removed from the upper chamber and deposited through the hole into the lower chamber. Not on theme with the stone in this entire discussion, but theologically so interesting that we can't let it pass by. Some of the words in Hebrew associated with what I'm talking about right now kind of blow up what has come down to us today in some religions as the doctrine of hell, because the name of this lower chamber is Sheol, rendered in various non-Jewish translations as either the grave or hell. The term means essentially the hollowed out place where the dead are stored. do not let me descend into Sheol, as is spoken in Psalms, is practical, not theological. Add to that the other term for afterlife in the Torah, being gathered to one's ancestors, and you have the sensible, direct, tangible background that makes complete sense if you see one of these tombs. You die, you're cleansed and you're shrouded, your body dries and, in the words of Torah or Tanakh, becomes corrupted, and then your bones are deposited with the bones of your generations that died before you did. Literally, you descend into Sheol and are gathered together with your ancestors. Nothing mystical about this. It is purely visual. It is purely tactile. All of the other stuff came much, much later. So if you have a literal fear of hell, rather than the healthy respect that Hasidic Judaism encourages us to have for the reality that we can create hell on earth for ourselves and for others, then it is worth stopping right here, right now, for a moment of serious contemplation and thinking the deep thoughts of what it means to be trapped by ideology, rather than to be in constant dialogue with learning and with the miracle of personal and societal evolution. I acknowledge it. Some of us have just had our sure knowledge challenged. So what are we going to do with it? But we're still not at the pillow that's not quite a proper pillow. If you visit Ketef Hinnom, the place of this first temple remnant, the outer chambers have been exposed by time and the elements, while some of the lower chambers remain intact, including the holes, so you can see the descent into Sheol. And they were intact enough into the 20th century that one of them yielded one of the greatest archaeological treasures ever, the oldest Torah script ever found, the priestly blessing on a silver amulet. Yet the outer chambers do still contain remnants of the ancient funerary processes, in this case in the form of slabs for the heads of the corpses, or indentations. It is a bit macabre, but it's incredibly helpful today to clearly see the half-oval, evenly carved indentations in a stone shelf with the clear purpose of cradling the head of an ancestor that has just passed on. Our ancestors didn't use pillow rocks as some magical ritual to become the Torah superheroes, but we did use them for a more permanent type of rest at burial. Jacob, essentially cast out and forced to go alone an unimaginable distance, not to mention dealing with the prospect of perhaps never being able to return to the only life he has ever known, came upon a specific place and lied down to die. And the place, oh yeah, according to Jewish tradition, just happens to be the same one where his father Isaac was to be sacrificed by Abraham, Isaac's father, Jacob's grandfather. Add some multi-generational messed upness, and Jacob's decision to use a rock in this symbolic fashion starts making some sense. And even if Jacob didn't come here actively with the purpose of killing himself, there's every reason to believe that with the prospect of this terrifying journey in front of him, as well as the fruits of his deceit behind him, that some part of him, upon encountering these stones so laden with his own family history, just decided to lay down and die. That these stones may have perhaps felt like the embrace of death that was less terrifying than the life that was coming towards him. But the narrative doesn't end. Jacob sleeps a sleep that he possibly did not intend to wake up from. But within this sleep of hopelessness, dreams that he is exactly where he needs to be on the journey he is required to take as part of the universal dialogue with himself and with that which is greater than him that had to happen. The symbols of the ladder and the angels are as good a symbols as you can get to bring about the realization that you are neither abandoned nor alone, that the very trauma that you are running from will simultaneously and without contradiction be that real trauma and form the foundation for that newer, stronger, and more evolved version of self. In the language of Torah, such moments require worship, specifically worship that made sense for those that wrote the Torah. We see this over and over again in the Torah narrative with three repeating aspects. An altar is erected, a sacrifice is made, and then the place is renamed to honor the specific nature of that meeting. But Jacob's journey is different, and his reaction is, well, for Jacob, not surprisingly, not the usual reaction. Jacob is not just an ancestor of a people. He is a progenitor of the individual tribes that made up a political reality that was all around the people who were writing these stories. In the sense of archetypal truth, Jacob was real. His journey was real. This was not the ancestor meeting with the eternal. This was the recognition of the reality of the eternal after meeting with hopelessness. And to prove it, rather than erecting a mizbeach, the Hebrew used for the altar upon which sacrifice is brought, Jacob instead erects what our translation has called a pillar, except for the word is matzeva, which even in biblical Hebrew means monument, just as today we use this word for the monument that we put on a grave. And then take the difference one step further. Rather than dedicating an altar either via libation or sacrifice, Jacob anoints the matzeva with oil. This ceremony in later times, when the oil is poured over the head of a king, is indicated by the verb in Hebrew limshoach, to anoint with oil. From this word we get the word Mashiach. Have we yet started to notice this stone? There's a repeating and terrifying experience that even recently I've witnessed. Someone has been wronged by someone else. There's nothing about that sentence that's funny, that should be seen as lighthearted, or that should be scoffed at. As we are humans, we have all wronged and have been wronged. This is part of what most universally makes us human and should most encourage us via our common humanity to experience compassion. From within this, however, there are multiple paths that we can take after we have been wronged. The one path involves regaining the broken parts of our soul, moving all one's energy into present time, and most painfully, understanding that as much as we would never wish such experiences, that it is only through such adversity that we grow. Justice may exist in this paradigm, but as well the humility to understand that we don't always get to define the justice. The other path involves never leaving the place of the trauma, where the word place refers to the reality of that trauma as it falls outside of space-time. Rephrased, if I stay within that trauma, even if it happened 20 years ago on a different continent, I will wake up every day in the moment of that trauma. It is my clear and present reality that defines the day that I am living, even if this day is linearly far in the future from that original event. And while it is my right to live that life if I so choose, it's not a pleasant life, and it is one where these elusive sensations of happiness and experiences of joy will be harder to capture. As we age within this path, we age bitterly, and we live only for that moment where we can cause the one who caused our trauma pain. And in this path, we must control and define the nature of justice. Still, acknowledging the right to choose this path, and even the seductive nature of this path, this is the place that's being spoken of in Torah. Look at this place. Abraham tried to sacrifice his son here. The scattered stones feel soaked in this trauma. Sure, it was needed for the Torah narrative, and bully for us, we've got a great story to get us through day 2 of Rosh Hashanah. The story of the binding of Isaac also helps us anthropologically understand the necessity from far in the past that we move from the ubiquity of human sacrifice to something higher evolved. And then we can ask Isaac how good it felt to be that upon which the wisdom has been built. Some things are easier for us to analyze than for the person who experienced it to experience. Can we even imagine such an experience and how that would change us and our family that comes after us? Jacob goes to a place, happens upon a place with multi-generational trauma, and he chooses on that night before the dream to be bitter. Understandably, even if the decision to lay down in the very symbol of a corpse repose is not a literal wish, it is at least the decision in that moment to choose a certain type of lifeless life. My brother's an idiot. Everyone knows he didn't deserve the right to be the firstborn. He was born just seconds before me. What a cosmic joke. All it took was some borscht to give everything up. Lentil stew, but borscht red. I like it better. What kind of tribal leader would he have been anyway? Do we hear his justification? Do we hear ours? Oh, we have all swam amid such thoughts. The spiral begins, and we can easily continue our descent on our own, or to invite our nearest and dearest of our Hallelujah chorus, who will get drunk with us and then aid us on the inevitable that comes next. You know what? Kick me out, will they? They think they can get rid of me so easily? Well, just wait till I contact my contacts in the newspaper. Wait till I post that personal conversation on Facebook. Wait till I take that picture meant for me and I post it on Twitter. Wait till I call their employer. Now my life has meaning. And with such words and feelings, we lay down to die. Maybe not my body, but the part of me that would wish to grow and evolve. Certainly the part of me that understands that spiritual evolution comes not in spite of our pain, but through the actual pain, or at least how we choose to deal with the actuality of that pain as it passes us by. But Jacob was given a chance. He has a cool dream about angels. We get a chance too. It will also involve angels. Of course, angel means messenger, and so the message will come to us in a dream, where we have a vision of what we look like after a lifetime of bitterness. Or maybe it'll be the friend that calls out of the blue, who says just that one thing that gives us that feeling in the pit of the stomach. And we know that the path that we have just chosen to lie down and make a stone pillow is not the life that we should live. Or maybe the message is nothing different than hearing a rabbi that you've met or have never met before talking about Jacob making this very decision, and this becomes a mirror to the decision that we've just made. An angel is probably only a real angel when they don't seem like one, but we will have the same opportunity as Jacob had. And when Jacob woke up, something clicked. He took the stone that represented his decision to die in one way or another and uses the very symbol of that choice to erect a memorial to that choice, a choice now not taken. Here lies Jacob's decision to become filled with hate and to stop growing for the sake of embittered revenge. I will call this Bethel, the house of God, because boy, did I encounter God in the place I least expected. Now he anoints it with a symbol that will take us to the thoughts of what in the future we're going to call Ha'olam Haba. The world not as it is right now, but the world as we make it through our choices, to take the stone of our worst experience and erect it to a memorial of our best choice. The questions that come out of this are nearly the same ones as the ones that we ask in preparation for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Who have I harmed, from whom I need to ask forgiveness, and who has harmed me that I need to forgive? But for Veyetzei, it's deeper. The High Holy Days focus on this past year. Veyetzei takes us back generations. It is necessary because every day when we wake up, a part of us is somewhere where at some point we chose to die. Part of us is still there. We will know it because instead of a memorial to our overcoming, when we look carefully at the stone, we've chiseled upon it the names of those that we hate, those that we are still bound and determined to destroy, to make pay. Only once the repetition of this question has helped us find where these stones are set, ready for us to lay a corpse on them, can we look and see what our rage has cost us. And then we get our oil. And then we rewrite what we in the past wrote in our despair. And then we begin to live. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you next time.
וקול שופר הריעו לפני המלך אדוני